Welcome to Bedtime Myths and Mysteries. Tonight, we investigate an enduring enigma that has quietly haunted American campuses for decades, a cursed room that most believe is just an urban legend until they encounter it themselves. This is the story of Room 428, a dormitory chamber so infamous that the university sealed it off permanently. But before it was locked away, strange things happened inside that room, things that defy explanation and still leave behind an echo of fear. Some claim a demon resides there. Others whisper about a spirit driven mad by centuries of silence. What we do know is this: Room 428 has a history steeped in darkness, and tonight we peel back that history, one chilling layer at a time. Our tale begins in the heart of Athens, Ohio, a quiet, forest-wrapped town that seems charming on the surface, but has long held the reputation of being one of the most haunted places in America. It's here, nestled within the tree-lined campus of Ohio University, that we find Wilson Hall, a dormitory built in 1965. Like many university buildings, it has seen thousands of students come and go. But Room 428 is different. It doesn't just have a reputation, it has a record. By the early 1970s, stories began circulating among students about odd occurrences in that particular room. Doors would slam shut without warning, lights would flicker in patterns, as though someone, or something, was trying to communicate. Radios turned on by themselves, even when unplugged, and perhaps most terrifying of all, residents reported waking in the middle of the night to the sound of heavy breathing, even though they lived alone. One student, a sophomore named James Carter, was among the earliest to file an official report. He claimed that his alarm clock went off every morning at precisely 3:33 a.m., even though he'd never set it for that time. At first, he dismissed it as a wiring issue, but then the scratches began, faint at first, on the walls beside his bed. Eventually, the scratches formed symbols, odd geometric shapes that he couldn't explain. He moved out before the semester ended. Following James's incident, the university quietly installed new wiring in Room 428. They even replaced the drywall twice. But the disturbances continued. Over the years, the reports grew more disturbing. One female student claimed that when she looked in the mirror, her reflection didn't move with her. Another swore that a figure in a black hood stood at the foot of her bed every single night, only vanishing when she turned on the light. Paranormal investigators were eventually brought in by a group of curious students in the late 1980s. They recorded unusual electromagnetic fluctuations and claimed to witness books being thrown off shelves. One investigator, who had previously worked with law enforcement on unexplained cases, left the room abruptly during the session and refused to speak of it again. He simply said, "There's something here that doesn't want us." But why Room 428? Why this room, in a modern building, at a university that had no history of violence or horror? The answer might lie in the land beneath Wilson Hall. Athens is unique. It forms the center point of what many call the pentagram of cemeteries. 5 historic graveyards, laid out in a near-perfect star formation, with Wilson Hall at the center. Some believe this geometric pattern isn't coincidental, but a kind of spiritual grid. In ancient folklore, the pentagram has long been associated with the occult. When inverted, it symbolizes the summoning of dark forces. Could Wilson Hall, and Room 428 specifically, be situated at a point of intense spiritual energy? Adding fuel to the theory is a chilling discovery made by university archivists in the early 1990s. In combing through records of land ownership, they uncovered evidence that the site where Wilson Hall now stands was once part of a spiritualist commune in the mid-1800s. The group practiced seances, automatic writing, and in more extreme cases, spirit summoning. One particular ritual, detailed in an old journal, described calling forth an unseen voice from the black hollow between stars, a poetic phrase many now interpret as a demonic invocation. The commune vanished by the turn of the century. No official explanation was ever given. And yet, the activity in room 428 continued. In 1992, the most well-documented case occurred, one that finally led to the university sealing off the room permanently. A male student, whose name was never released publicly, suffered a psychological breakdown after spending only 6 weeks in the room. He was found babbling in the hallway, eyes wide, his fingers covered in ink. He had written across the walls, in a language no one could translate, glyphs, spirals, and cryptic diagrams. When asked what happened, he said only this: "It speaks in dreams. It knows your name." After that, room 428 was locked, not reassigned, not repainted, just sealed. A plaque outside reads, "Closed for maintenance," but no repairs have been done in over 3 decades. No janitor holds a key, and the door has been reportedly sealed from the inside. Yet, that hasn't stopped the stories. Some students claim to hear tapping from within the walls late at night. Others report cold spots in the hallway outside. Campus security has been called more than once by students insisting they saw a face in the window of the darkened room. But upon investigation, the room is always empty, locked, untouched. And here's the most unnerving detail. Even with the room sealed, incidents continue to occur in Wilson Hall, particularly in rooms that sit adjacent to or below 428. One RA reported hearing whispering voices from the ceiling. Another student awoke to find all the drawers in her desk open, with her textbooks stacked neatly on the floor in a perfect spiral. Some believe the demon or entity that occupies room 428 cannot be confined by walls, that it seeps through stone and brick, whispering to those it deems receptive. And what does it want? That no one knows for sure. But according to those who have dared to investigate, the entity feeds on attention, fear, and, most importantly, belief. The more you talk about it, the more you draw it near. The whispers surrounding room 428 never really went away. Decades passed, and students continued to tell the tale at midnight bonfires, in hushed tones at library tables, or with nervous laughter in dorm lounges. Yet no one ever actually forgot about the room. Its legend was passed down like an inherited fear, half a warning, half a dare. But in the early 2000s, something happened that reignited national attention and thrust the tale of room 428 into a terrifying new chapter. It began with a documentary crew, young filmmakers from Chicago working on a project about America's most haunted colleges. Ohio University had made every top 10 list they researched. The centerpiece of their episode? You guessed it, Jefferson Hall. And at the center of Jefferson Hall's mythos was room 428. With no formal permission from the university, they posed as students and managed to sneak into Jefferson Hall under the guise of conducting interviews. For a few days, They filmed B-roll around campus, students offering second-hand stories, professors waving off the topic with thinly veiled unease, and janitors who outright refused to speak when room 428 was mentioned. One janitor, an older man named Leonard, eventually broke the silence. "I cleaned that floor back in '83, he said. "Saw things in that hallway I still can't explain. Heard music when there was no radio. Smelled roses and rot at the same time. Then one morning, I found claw marks in the paint outside that room. Human-sized, 5 fingers, deep enough to strip the drywall." Intrigued, the filmmakers became obsessed. They convinced themselves that if they could get inside room 428, even for a few minutes, it would be the breakthrough moment their documentary needed. And late one night, they did. A maintenance door on the second floor was left ajar. One of the crew members, a former locksmith's apprentice, had brought tools just in case. The old brass lock on room 428 took less than 30 seconds to yield. The creak of the door opening was caught on tape. The footage, which later leaked in part online, was grainy and chaotic. Night vision cameras showed walls covered in peeling paint, strange dark smears that the crew couldn't identify, and a mirror that, though cracked in several places, still hung upright on the wall. At first, nothing happened. They laughed nervously, panned their cameras across the room, and joked about ghost hunting tropes. Then the air changed. One crew member, a woman named Carly, suddenly felt faint and sat down. She began to cry uncontrollably, clutching her chest, whispering something incoherent. Her audio feed captured her repeating one phrase over and over. "It's watching from behind the glass." When the others turned toward the mirror, they reported seeing something move, a shadow, a flicker, a blur of something impossibly tall, with long arms that scraped the floor. But when they pointed the camera at the mirror again, there was nothing there. That's when the light in the hallway went out. They scrambled to exit, but the door had locked behind them. For 43 seconds, according to the timestamp, they pounded on the door and screamed. Finally, someone outside heard them and opened the hallway door. When they escaped, Carly had to be sedated. She was later admitted to a psychiatric facility and never returned to film school. The footage that survived was confiscated by university officials, but not before a low-resolution copy made it to a paranormal message board. To this day, it remains one of the most hotly debated pieces of ghost evidence online. Debunkers claim it's a hoax. Others argue the rawness of the fear is too authentic to fake. But beyond just cameras and students, the room's effect has spread in subtler ways. An English professor, Dr. Lillian Mercado, once assigned her students a paper on urban legends and local folklore. A freshman wrote about room 428. In her essay, she included a sketch, an intricate spiral symbol she claimed to have dreamt about after walking past the room. Dr. Mercado, intrigued, looked into the symbol and discovered something unsettling. The spiral bore a remarkable resemblance to a 15th century sigil found in the Munich Manual of Demonic Magic, a real grimoire written in Latin and used by European occultists during the Renaissance. Worried that the student may have unknowingly tapped into something dark, Dr. Mercado arranged a meeting, but the student never showed. She dropped out weeks later, and university records show no further activity under her name. When the professor inquired with housing about her whereabouts, she was told, "That's not our concern anymore." Other students have reported nightmares after sleeping near room 428, vivid, recurring dreams involving long hallways, laughter coming from behind walls, and shadowy figures with glowing red eyes. Some dream of the same figure repeatedly, a man with a stitched mouth, standing still in the corner of a room, his hands pressed against the wall as if listening through the plaster. A small group of students, calling themselves the 428 Watchers, began holding unofficial seances in the common areas of Jefferson Hall, hoping to communicate with whatever might linger behind the sealed door. One such seance reportedly ended in a blackout, lights across the entire building shutting off for precisely 13 seconds. One participant, a skeptic-turned-believer, claimed to have heard whispering in her own voice as the darkness fell. The university officially denies any supernatural activity. Their statement to local media is always the same. Room 428 is no longer used due to structural concerns. Any rumors to the contrary are unfounded and unsubstantiated. But students know better. Every fall semester, on the anniversary of that girl's scream, the one from the 1980s, candles are mysteriously found outside room 428. No one sees who leaves them. No cameras catch them, but they appear, year after year. And then, of course, there's the mirror. The original mirror still hangs inside the room. It's bolted to the wall, and no one has dared remove it. Rumors persist that it's not a reflection at all, but a window, a doorway, a link to something older than the university itself. Because if there's one thing that every student, janitor, professor, and brave investigator agrees on, it's this. Room 428 is not just haunted, it is possessed. By the end of October, the leaves on the campus grounds had turned brittle and red, the wind sweeping them into swirls along the cracked pavement between buildings. The students of Wilson Hall walked a little faster now, their heads down, avoiding the windows on the 4th floor. Something had changed, not just in the dorm, but in the students themselves. A quiet panic had taken root. Amber and Professor Kenley had grown inseparable in their search for the truth. They worked in a rhythm, piecing together diaries from long-gone faculty, secret disciplinary files, and even stolen pages from the archives of local churches. From these, they unearthed a terrifying detail left out of most of the legends. Room 428 had once been sealed, not renovated, not reassigned, but ritually bound. They found mention of a ceremony performed in 1923 by a group of campus theologians and one hired occultist. The ritual required a sacrifice, something dear to the university itself, to bind the entity that had been awakened on the 4th floor. It wasn't an exorcism, it was a caging. The room was to be a prison, and the seal on the floor, long since covered by new linoleum, had been the key. But the renovation in the 1980s had broken the circle, and ever since, something had been leaking out. Amber started noticing that her memories were slipping. She would reread her own notes and find pages of script she didn't remember writing, paragraphs detailing events she hadn't experienced. They were always signed with her name. When she showed them to Professor Kenley, he remained silent, his face pale and distant. He had found something similar. They were being watched, not by the university, not by a person, but by the room itself. Its awareness was expanding, Students complained of scratching under their beds and cold hands brushing their backs in the shower. A girl on the 3rd floor tried to take her own life after dreaming for 17 nights of a door with no handle. When they checked her dorm, the door to the storage closet next to her room had changed. It now bore the number 428. Kenley proposed something desperate. They would reenact the original binding ritual, but the records were incomplete. They had the symbols, they had the prayers. What they lacked was the sacrifice. "I think it has to be one of us," Amber said one night, her voice shaking. "Not our lives, but something permanent, something that matters." Kenley offered first. His voice. He would never lecture again. It was a symbolic surrender of power, appropriate for someone whose career was built on words. They gathered what they needed: candles from the cathedral's basement, incense from a store run by a man who never spoke, chalk mixed with soil from the university's original foundations. They returned to room 428 in the dead of night. As they began the ritual, the air thickened. The smell of rot poured from the vents. The chalk lines glowed faintly, as if the room recognized the shapes, like a prisoner watching the guards return. The candles burned with unnatural steadiness. Kenley chanted the Latin phrases, while Amber stood at the center of the circle, reading the invocation. Halfway through, something answered. The lights died. The room tilted slightly, as if the building itself were bending inward. A sound filled the space, like screaming underwater. The walls bled condensation, and the window began to frost over. Then came the whisper. It spoke in a voice that sounded like every scream Amber had ever heard, overlapping, out of sync, yet intimately personal. "You open the door," it said. "You do not get to close it." Kenley collapsed, gripping his throat, his voice already gone. Amber shouted the final phrase, tears streaming down her face. The candles exploded into ash. Then, silence. Room 428 returned to stillness. The next morning, there was no trace of the ritual. The chalk lines had vanished, the wax stains gone. Kenley never spoke again and left the university 2 weeks later. Amber returned to class, changed. She passed her thesis with distinction, but never pursued her doctorate. But room 428 remained locked until the day, 15 years later, when a new construction project was announced. Wilson Hall was to be demolished and rebuilt. The ghost stories were dismissed as superstition. The blueprints showed no room numbered 428. But in the rubble, as the building came down brick by brick, workers uncovered something strange. Beneath the floor, where room 428 once stood, a sealed trapdoor, and under it, a staircase, spiraling down into the earth. The site was shut down. A university spokesperson claimed structural instability. No one has seen the staircase since. But sometimes, at night, a bell rings from beneath the ground. No bell exists on campus, not since the old tower was torn down. The sound is low, deliberate, and final. And some say the demon never left. It just went deeper. Thank you for joining us on tonight's descent into the shadows of haunted dormitories and the legend of room 428. If this story gave you chills or left you wondering what might be lurking just beyond the edge of the ordinary, you're in the right place. Here on Bedtime Myths and Mysteries, we explore the eerie, the forgotten, and the inexplicable, all told in a way that's perfect for listening as you drift off to sleep. But be warned, some tales might just keep you awake. If you enjoyed this story, please give the video a like, share it with a friend who loves the unexplained, and subscribe so you never miss another nighttime journey into the unknown. We upload regularly, and each tale is darker and deeper than the last. Until next time, stay curious, sleep lightly, and remember, some doors, once opened, never truly close.